Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Alan Roebke, Alexandria, Minnesota. Today I have the pleasure of Jim Mulder here, experienced in county government. And Jim, welcome to Inform TV. Can you give us a little background on yourself?
Well, Alan, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this program. I grew up in Renville, Minnesota, and grew up on a farm. And for the last 21 years, I was the executive director of the Association of Minnesota Counties. In that role, I worked with county officials and other local officials and state legislators and the governor and administration on a variety of issues that affected local government and affected the citizens of the state of Minnesota. In the last 2 years, I've been working on a dissertation to get my doctorate and really focusing on how best to position local government and local government officials to deal with the future and the kind of the new things that we're trying to deal with today.
Excellent. My audience here at Inform TV, they know that we're on the same page. I've been trying to encourage them to talk to their legislature, their congressmen, their city councils, and that we must change government. We just can't talk about the fact that we got to forget the partisanship. We have to change the structure to get things to happen.
And particularly the opportunity is here right now, because there isn't the partisan rhetoric at the local level. It really is about citizens, who work in local government, who are trying to make a difference, trying to set up our counties and our cities in a way that makes sense.
Okay, well that sounds good. But yet at the same time, before we get in our discussion with Jim Mulder here, we're going to welcome home all the communities that Inform TV serves with a wide statewide audience. We want to share with you the welcome home that the Alexandria Lakes area community, Douglas County and the surrounding counties did to the Red Bulls. Take a listen. Well, for our audience on Informed TV, if you just happen to tune in and miss the introduction I just had with our guest today, Jim Mulder, talking about county government, that was the welcome home the Alexandria Lakes area gave to returning Red Bulls for their service to their country. And we just wanted to share with the communities in Duluth, Rochester, St. Cloud, Wilmer, Marshall, around the state that also have Red Bulls, and we salute these people for their service to our country. The program today, we're going to take a look at county government from an individual, Jim Mulder, who has been involved with county government for a big part of his life, and in his educational process is studying it, continues to study it, and does presentations around the state. Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk about redesigning Minnesota state and local governments. The future ain't what it used to be. Great topic, Jim. It's all yours.
Alan, thank you so much. I do like and enjoy talking about this because after having spent my career working with local government officials, I think I felt their frustration at having a system that just doesn't seem to be doing all of the things that we would hope it would do. When I was trying to come up with a good title for this, I always go to Yogi Berra. Yogi always had a great saying for everything, and I think it truly is that the future ain't what it used to be, and how we think about it. So let's talk a little bit about how did we get here, and how do I say that current government in Minnesota is not sustainable. Let me give you a few examples.
Sounds good.
There's a county in Minnesota that I'm very aware of. They have 37 police officers. They have a population of between 13 and 15,000 people. They have more police officers per capita than the city of Minneapolis.
Okay.
But they have 9 police chiefs. If you think about that, you ask the question, well, why is that? Or another example, there's a county in the state that, because they were very concerned about all of the administration it took to do certain things, they looked at if somebody wanted to, if I was a citizen and I had done a work for the county and I submitted a bill to have the county pay me for it, how many different stops does that warrant, is what they're called, take? They found it took 37 different stops within the county before the money actually got to the person who was requesting it and being paid for the services that they had provided. A third one, water management. This is a story about down in Jackson County, Minnesota. It was a 10-acre wetland, and there was going to be a meeting with the landowner to decide what can we do with this land. Well, there were 7 different agencies from the state and local governments that showed up for that meeting, including the Soil and Water Conservation District, the Watershed District, the Ditch Authority, the County Planning and Zoning, the Township Organization. There was then from the state, it was the DNR, and then the Department of Agriculture, all of whom showed up at this meeting not to make the decision about what we should do, but to make the decision about, well, who's in charge?
Yeah, we see that.
You get that kind of thing there. And then there's a fourth one that I think is one that happens in every community. It's around the issue of public libraries. We have our school libraries, we have our city and county libraries, we have college and junior college libraries, and they're all kind of separate functions. In St. Peter, Minnesota, for instance, you can go to St. Peter and within 3 blocks there's 4 different libraries. Sadly, 2 of those libraries, one's a junior high school library and one's the elementary school library, are only open 8 months a year, and yet about 70% of the volumes in those libraries are in the other libraries. So you just think that there could be a better way to kind of manage their resources. So why did we get to this place? And maybe there's a few reasons that I think I've come up with. First is government in Minnesota, like every place in the nation, was really about geography. It was about where we located things. And if you looked at cities, most cities across the nation and in Minnesota were located at the convergence of rivers. It just happens that that's how we moved from one place to another. We used river traffic. And if you get into, someplace up here in the prairie, it was kind of a normal spot. Here it was about water.
And then they evolved to railroads.
And then you evolve to railroads.
Based on horse travel.
Based on horse travel. What in my hometown of Renville, which was on a railroad spur, there had been a place called Peterson Rapids, which was down by the river. They literally picked up the town and moved it 10 miles north to be on the railroad spur. But we have a town every 8 miles because that's where the railroad needed more water for the steam engines. If you looked at Minnesota's towns, the townships, a lot of that was determined because of in 1785, there was something called the Land Act, the United States Land Act, which President Jefferson at the time said, we really should have a survey of all land that was now being added to the original part of our nation. So 6 miles by 6 miles became a township. And if you look at a lot of the territory that was added, that's how it was done. And so you have that same thing happening when you get to Minnesota's 87 counties. And if you look, here's a map of Minnesota's 87 counties, and there were 4 things that came into play. The first was the Jeffersonian model. Jefferson believed, one, he didn't like cities. Jefferson didn't think that was such a good thing. But what he saw is everybody should be able to get to the county courthouse in 1 day's ride to and from their home. Well, if you look at this bottom tier counties, that's kind of the way it was set up.
On a horse and buggy basis.
On a horse and buggy basis. The second was, well, rivers. And this is the Minnesota River, and if you look at the Mississippi, they were hard to get over. There were very few places to get across the Minnesota River, so it made sense to make a boundary be a river. And you can see that kind of all across the state. The third area was, if you look at this big, broad area up here and with these really big counties, what you see is that these were what we called the beaver principle.
Okay.
It was about economics. It was about beaver pelts and about lumbering and other kinds of economic reasons why these counties would be this size. Now, the last county that we have was Lake of the Woods County. That had been part of Beltrami County. They became a county in the 1920s, mostly because you could not get from here to Bemidji, which was the county seat, during most of the year.
Swampland.
Because it's through the peat bog. The final thing is really something we call political tomfoolery. For instance, if you look at McLeod and Sibley County down here, you see this little notch that's right in here.
Used to farm in those areas.
Yep. Well, this was about a poker game.
Okay.
Is that the folks from McLeod County and the folks from some leaders from Sibley County were having a poker game, and the stakes was what happened to these 2 townships.
Okay.
They went with McLeod County.
Wow.
But so that was the first of the second big reasons. We seem to like a lot of government in Minnesota. For instance, we have over 3,500 local governments in the state. There are some statistics, and some people suggest that Minnesota has more governments per capita than any other state in the nation. There are nearly 20,000 elected officials.
Wow.
That's a lot of elected officials. For instance, we have 1,800 townships with over 8,000 elected officials. We have over 800 cities with 5,000 officials, 300 school districts, 87 counties, and over 600 special districts. And here's just kind of a broad list. Now, there's 610 listed here, and these were all special districts for a variety of purposes. And these are the ones that report to the secretary or to the state auditor for doing their audits.
Okay.
Well, we think there are another 300 or 400 beyond these that have never been identified by the state auditor. Now, some of it makes sense. I mean, some of them make a lot of sense. Hospital districts, that seems to be a smart thing to do. But we have over 100 economic development authorities. We have housing. There are about 4 different ones that do housing. We have 5 recreational authorities. So you have all sorts of different kinds of things that are providing services. Sometimes doing it at the same time. So you have EDAs and you have housing authorities, you have soil. I mean, we have all of these kinds of things, and it's sometimes you wonder, is it too much?
And The invasive species still came to Minnesota. You know,
That's
we're sitting with the zebra mussel in the Alexandria Lakes area and the Asian carp and all this regulation, all these watchdogs, so to speak, and the problem still came.
Absolutely. And so you have like lake improvement districts, lake conservation districts, we have the soil and water conservation districts, you have all of these rural water systems, you have all of these kinds of things that sometimes are working at cross purposes. And what this costs and what people need to understand, we spend a lot of money on administration and less on services than we would need to if we could find better methods of doing this. The third thing is the issue of state and federal mandates. I think if you talk to local government officials particularly, they will tell you the most frustrating thing that they have in local government is the issues around state and federal mandates. Some of them, and not all of them are bad. They're a very important part of what government does. But at the same time, they're always about, or too often, they're about what the process is, not about what the outcome is. They focus on how do I do something and not focusing on what did we do and what are we going to do to make life better for the citizens of our community. So do they solve problems? Sometimes, but sometimes they create more problems. And so we have to always remember so many of these state and federal mandates that get in the way of being able to do business. We did a study at the Association of Minnesota Counties a few years ago where we looked at how much of a county budget is mandated.
Okay.
Now, because Minnesota has a social services system that is administered at the county level, we have a significantly higher. There's 12 states that have that. So somewhere between 65 and 75% of what a county does is in the result of a federal or state mandate.
Okay.
Now, the part that isn't mandated is the part that people like the most generally. It's county roads. But yet, even that process is confusing. You have to be a pretty astute driver to know when you're driving on a city road, a township road, a county road, a state highway, or a federal road. And you can see as you watch that system, and if you look at that system, when you see people, how they plow snow, how they do some things, sometimes, even though it's the same mission, which is to get me or goods from one place to the other, oftentimes they run into conflict with each other.
And we've all experienced
We've all experienced where
whether you're in Rochester or St. Cloud or Duluth or Alexandria.
You see that snowplow that sometimes they lift their blade because they're driving on another jurisdiction's road to get to their road. So that's kind of the third one. The fourth one, which is becoming in some ways the biggest issue of our time, and I just say we live too long. If you look at when we designed our current government frameworks, a lot of that was designed back in the 1960s and prior to that. And we had all sorts of actuarials that said we're going to be living until we're 69. So we had Social Security in the 1930s and 40s. We have then the Medicare and all those kinds of programs. And government was built on this idea that this base was always going to get bigger. And as we get bigger, we'd have more people, more resources, more stuff, then we could do more services on top of that. So what we found is in the 1990s, we started to see a huge change. And this is, I think, the thing that people should really be aware of. How are we changing if you look at population?
And we can't change without modernizing the system. I mean, that's what my audience keeps hearing from me, Jim.
You can't, and this is inevitable. I can't change this trend line. If you look, the number of people from 70 to 79, if you look in the next 20 years, is going to grow by 142%.
Okay.
But the working area, where we are fully employed and our best working years, if you look 40 to 49, is going to decrease. 50 to 59 is only going to increase by 9%. And 60 to 69 is 58. What this means is that there's going to be a smaller base of population for a larger base of retirees.
Us baby boomers.
People who need services.
And who's going to do the work, and yet unfortunately, Jim, we're seeing our federal government dropping the contribution from 6.2% to 4.2% and wondering How does that address
That's
Social
right.
Security?
And if you look at how we live our lives, this is equally important. Early in our lives, we borrow money. This is, the folks coming out of college, I buy a house, I buy a car, I buy all those things. And then this is where our income line, it goes up, and then we ultimately go down. Then in our middle years, we save money for retirement, and then when we get to retirement age, we start dissaving. Now, our problem is, or a huge problem is, that we are forcing, one, more borrowing here than we ever have before. We are requiring parents to pay for kids' education because the kids can't borrow enough money, so we're losing the amount of savings that we have.
Even their insurance, so
Even
they're
their
26,
insurance.
27 years
Yep.
old now.
And so all of a sudden this number has to be pushed out, which then leads you.
But at the same time, we're still allowing people in their 60s and 70s to get a 30-year mortgage.
Yep, and that's the issue that we have to deal with. Is that how do you get to that next place? Because again, if you look at when we earn our money, it is again, if you remember those past charts, these numbers up here, well, how much we earn and how much we pay in taxes, and this is state taxes, starts to decline when you get to 65 to 74 and keeps declining. Now, often this is pensions or other kinds of savings, but all of a sudden those things are really changing, and the final piece that you have to remember is when you spend on health care. Again, when you get to your elderly in life, these numbers go way up.
And mention some of those numbers in case somebody can't see them. We're 65 to 74, 9,000. At 75 plus, just about 10,000, and an average of 35.71.
And now remember, these are the people who are already dissavers.
Okay.
They're being supported by this group, and this group is getting smaller.
Wonderful.
The bad part about healthcare is that the solution to the healthcare problem is if I knew when the last 6 months of a person's life was, you could reduce this number a lot, because we spend, on average, between 70 and 80% of our health spending is spent in the last 6 months of our lives.
And is there any quality of life there at all?
That's the question, and that's the hard decisions that we have to look at. I'm not promoting any of those things, but that's the issue that we have. The fifth reason is that government focuses on process, not outcomes. If you look, and there was a reason for this. If you go back to the 1900s, there was a lot of graft and a lot of nepotism. There were a lot of bad things happening around government. So in the early 1900s, we put in place in this nation some really strict ways that you had to do government business.
Okay.
To try to eliminate that. And that was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing that, we set in place we set in place processes that don't reflect today's reality of how do we communicate, etc. For instance, county social workers spend about 40% of their time filling out forms that they have to send either to the state or federal government. Now, some of this, if somebody has to go through this, what you will find is that, for instance, you might have to sign your name anywhere from 8 to 10 times. And the social worker is filling in your names and addresses multiple times.
Okay.
Well, with technology today, you should only have to do that once.
Correct.
I'll give you another great example. Recently, I bought a car, and I needed to get my title. And I bought the car in November, about the middle of November, and this is in the Twin Cities, and the title was driven up to the Department of Public Safety. Now, when I was filling out the title, I noticed that the gentleman that I was buying the car from, he was filling in the forms, and there were at least 6 different forms that he needed to fill out to get a title for my car. So that seemed silly. I saw triplicate paper, which I had not seen for many, many, many years.
Okay.
So all of a sudden it got in, and now this was in November. By around the first of the year, my wife asked, well, have we gotten the title yet? And I said, no. And I stopped at the dealership. So after about 2 months, I thought, well, it's kind of unusual, maybe something bad. He said, no. He says, we should be able to get it in another month or so. It got to February 1st, I hadn't seen it. Got to March 1st, I hadn't seen it. Finally, we got the title on March 15th. And I said, why are we still doing this in hard copy? Why isn't there just a jump drive that I can plug into my computer?
Exactly.
Go out, do it like But
modernizing government.
Modernizing government.
Modernizing the paperwork.
Another great example. I always, people say, well, why doesn't government work like a business? Well, I want to say it the other. What would happen if McDonald's would work like government?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you probably would do is you'd walk into the McDonald's, you would walk up to one counter, and you would order your French fries, and then you'd walk to another counter and you'd order your burger. You'd walk to a third counter and order your drink. And then if it was really government, you'd have to walk across the street to pay for it. And then after you had paid for it, you'd have to go someplace else to make sure to check that you had paid the right amount. So government needs to use business principles, although they don't need to be a business. So I'm going to stop right there because I think we're going to look at then what are some of the solutions in a minute. But as you can see, and as what I've tried to lay out as we have this discussion, is government needs to kind of move into this new generation. We need to take advantage of technology. We need to spend more time looking at what the outcomes are and less about what the process was.
Exactly.
If you talk to a county board, we put huge resources into the audit function. In fact, there's a statistic that we spend about $7 at the local level, at a government level, to find the last penny in the accounting system. Sometimes, if you ask McDonald's or Burger King, they'll tell you, well, we have a 2% wastage policy. We stop looking for that last one because it costs us more to find it. Now, I'm not trying to say that we should allow that, but we really need to rethink how we are doing our business.
We want, government has been so focused on to save a penny and lose $10,000.
Yeah, when I talk about it in our next segment, what we will be talking about really is what are some ideas that we can do, some practical daily things that we can change that will make government more responsive. Some of them are big things. Some of them are about how we could change public education so that our college system and our K-12 system can be more integrated. Why do we have systems the way we have them today? Well, part of it is that's because we always did it. But some of them are just little things. Some of them are just getting better technology. Using the cloud, for instance, is one example about getting technology from one place to another. Sharing services between cities and counties, or in counties and counties. Thinking about scale. There's a whole bunch of things I think we can talk about.
Well, we're starting to run down in time, and I guess, Jim, from a standpoint, this is fantastic for a discussion. This is what Informed TV is all about, and that's why I always ask our listeners to send it to their elected officials, whether in city government, county government, state government, federal government, because I think we here at Informed TV have a unique platform. And one of the things that I want my audience, especially the charter customers around the state, to understand that we're going to do after this another half-hour segment, and I think I'm going to try to post it for the week. Normally you're used to seeing a program on charter or some of our other cable outlets for a full week. But with Jim's great knowledge on the issues, I'm going to try to get charter to do either 3 or 4 days of this first program in the week, and then 3 days of the second segment, so you kind of look for that change in our programming, because I think it's essential for what everybody's concerned about on this election year, Jim, the modernization of government, that we don't just keep fighting between Republicans, Democrats, independents, and start seeing that government serves the people as we, quote, learn in the textbook as kids. But when we get older, we find that it's just not happening. And what you rightfully brought out is the fact that we're in the computer age, but government is not. It's in the computer age in jerks and stops and the cost of that. So thanks for listening to Informed TV. I'm Alan Roebke, and watch for the next segment with Jim Mulder.